I thought I'd start at the beginning, really the beginning. It so happened my father was from Glasgow. My mother was from South Wales. And after they were married, they settled in London, in Cricklewood, actually. And if you look at the street map of London and you look at Marble Arch and travel out the Edgware Road, about 3 miles, that's where I lived before World War II.
Wow.
And so consequently, before I was born, Dad decided he had to join up with all the Scottish activities he could. So he joined the London Booktyping Society, which was a natural, also the London Scottish Clans Association, and the London branch of the Black Watch Association. And for those last 2 items, he was also their assigned piper. So it meant that during the 30s, I was taken to a lot of the Scottish Clans Association children's parties. The first one I ever went to, I was 19 months old. And I have a record of it in my mother's baby book. She said that it was held at the Harrods Ballroom. Did you ever know that Harrods had a ballroom on the top floor? Probably didn't. But I remember we went in a side entrance so that we could go up in the lift to the top floor directly. We also had a second party almost every year, but that was held at the Scottish Corporation Hall, which was on Fetter Lane, which is right off Fleet Street. So I got into sort of these activities fairly young, as you can imagine, enjoying myself as a child might in any silly little party. The only dancing I did in the 30s was in 1937, and that was coronation year for George VI. And when I was in school, they took a select few people who could keep time to music to learn how to do a maypole dance. I do remember floating around this pole with these ribbons, in and out, in and out, and that was all the dancing I ever did, other than at home. My mother was a pianist, so she was often playing the piano, so I would be jumping around the living room along with her playing, and that was it. Come September 1939, guess what? My mother, my brother, my cousin, and myself were evacuated to her Welsh village in South Wales. And we were there for the 6 years. And so in Wales, they do have their own traditional dance form, but we never saw any of it. But they are so interested in music and poetry. I got landed up about age 9, 10, and 11, going off to an elocution class every Saturday morning, and also followed up with a singing class. So somewhere along the line during that time period, I actually competed in a children's Eisteddfod, which is, you've heard of those things. Of course I didn't win anything, I didn't expect it. But I do know that Dad had come down from London to visit because he knew I was competing in this thing. And he brought for me, he knew I wasn't going to win anything, but he brought with him a bar of chocolate. And that was a prize for me for doing it. And of course, you couldn't get much of those things in those days. So I don't know where he rifled it from, but he got it and wrote it down. So I didn't see anything more of the London area until end of July 1945. My mother had returned with my brother and cousin into London right after, I think it was just before VE Day, which was in May. They went at Easter time, and I was stayed with another friend to finish out the school year because Mother insisted that I finish that year. I was in secondary school and she felt it was more important than Ian, who was 6 years younger than me. It wasn't so important for him, but she felt I should stay. So I eventually got back and we moved house from Cricklewood to Harrow on VJ Day. August 15th, I think, isn't it, VJ Day? Correct me if I'm wrong. But the thing was, during the time Mother and Dad had been there before my coming back, they'd been house hunting. They decided for 5 people, the flat we were living in was not exactly appropriate. We only had 1 bedroom, 1 living cum dining room, 1 kitchen, and a bathroom about a floor and a half away. It wasn't exactly convenient for 5 people. So anyway, we went to Harrow. And from that point on, Dad left the Clans Association, Scottish Clans, and we all joined the Harrow Caledonian Society. And we discovered that in September that year, 45, they had the first Highland Games after the war. And apparently they'd spent quite a few months after VE Day planning this. And it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was at a place called Wheathampstead, which is a few miles north of St. Albans. Well, you could imagine how many Scots in the London area who maneuvered themselves somehow to St. Albans and then up in the bus to Wheathampstead, because nobody had cars in those days. Nobody, very few did, maybe the big wigs did, but the rest of us didn't. And what I remember, I didn't remember the events. What I remembered were the queues waiting for the bus to go home. They were enormous. But apparently the local authorities had been notified that they were having an influx of people like crazy at that hour. It was probably about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So we did eventually got home, and I don't know how many changes we had to make, 2 or 3 at least. But anyway, that was my first experience going to a games, which I don't remember a thing about. Sounds silly, doesn't it? Well, a few years later.
Do you remember which games that was, Jeanetta?
It was just called the Highland Games, Wheathampstead, just after the name of the place.
Okay.
But other than that, we didn't have another outdoor games like that until at least 2 or 3 years later. And that was at White City Stadium. Now, the fun thing was, it was a sports stadium. So, of course, your audience was all the way around with a centralized location, because it was football and everything else that they played there. But the main feature that I remember particularly was after the pipes and drums and the actual military bands had done their parading up and down and all the rest of it, as you all well know at the games this happens, would you believe, on comes the US Air Force Band. Because there was an Air Force deployment right at Northolt Airport, which was only a couple of miles from where we lived. But they were hired to come and play at the games. Well, we all started to laugh because they were playing the St. Louis Blues, and they were moving at such a pace that we had never, ever seen a pipe band or a military band move. They were just traveling like crazy. And the person in the back row was a very small man, and he was playing this enormous sousaphone. Well, I tell you, they got a standing ovation at the end of it because it was so different from what we were all used to. And we just had a good laugh at it. We really did. It was really funny. And in between these 2 games, and even after that second one, they held indoor competitions, step piping and dancing, at the London Scottish Regiment's drill hall in part of London, sort of down behind Victoria Station area. And of course, that's when I was sort of introduced to a lot of these Scottish dancers who had been on the boards at the other games, which I didn't know anything about at that point. And Jen have managed to find a picture or 2 pictures of the 2 of the people who were really competing at that point in their lives, and in my life too, in a way. Alex, if you could sort of bring up that first one. On the left, you see Bobby Watson, who maybe you've heard of, and on the right was Catriona Buchanan. Picture suddenly disappeared, but there we are. Let's go back. There it is. Okay, these 2, there was another fellow, another short fellow. His name was Bertie Robertson. And so these were some of the people I was sort of watching in the 40s competing. Dad was always there because he was invariably playing at these playing for the dancing. And ultimately, he became a judge. Listen, mind you, this is all before the official board was developed, which was in the 50s.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was that. Well, lo and behold, backing up a little bit, when we were in that queue, thank you, Alex. When we were in that queue, Dad started talking to the couple behind us, and it so happened to be Jack McConaughey and his wife, Jean. You may have heard of him. He was one of the instrumental people who did the 18th century book, ultimately, in the 60s, and then a couple of subsequent books himself after that. but he was essentially a Highland teacher, but did country on the side. So what had happened was, Dad had said to Ian and myself, it's about time you two learned some of Scottish culture. So off we went to Highland dance classes. I was 14 or thereabouts, and Ian was 7. And we were the first two in this church hall in Sudbury. We could get there by tube, so that was easy for us to do. And I must admit, I don't know how many hours we were dancing, but on Sunday morning, we came downstairs on our rear ends. There was no way we could walk down the stairs. None whatsoever.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. Well, in around about 1946, 47-ish, Jack wanted to start a children's class and a young adult class of Highland in the city. So he and Dad got their heads together and put together the Strathspey School of Highland Dancing. And they made a picture, a photograph. Here, Alex, if we could go to number 2, we have Jack on the left and my father on the right, posing for their advertisement for the Highland dance class that they were going to do. So I've got the original of that picture, and I've had it for years and years and years, obviously. And it's one of the few I've got with the 2 of them just posing together. I've got them dancing and doing other things together, but this is one that I really like. It shows them up very well. So there we are. So that's when I started going off to these Highland dance classes. Now the thing was, what did we use for music? Jack had 78s. You remember those things? 78 records? Well, he had enough to handle a Highland, but he also had some country dance CD records as well. So he started at about the same time on a Saturday evening, a social country dance class. It wasn't really a class, except when we started up back again, he was reviewing footwork and everything else with all the people who turned up who hadn't danced for 6 years. So, and a lot of them came from other organizations in the area, all Scottish organizations, different ones, and started off in this church hall in Sudbury. And that's where I started to learn country dancing, was in that situation. So I was doing at the same time Highland and country. So I did both. Of course, as a teenager, you're a bit more of a sponge than you are when you get older. And you absorb an awful lot that you don't realize you're absorbing. Mm-hmm. And so
this, sorry, Jeanetta, was this with Jack McConaughey also, or I lost that part of it?
Yes, with Jack McConaughey.
Okay.
Yes. In 1946.
Gotcha. So he offered both through his school.
Yes.
Great.
So he was the one that started off doing the socials as well. And he did teach at his own house, which we discovered he did live not too far from us, so we could take the tube to his house if we wanted to do anything different, or he wanted to show us anything different, we could go there too. So we were sort of in the middle. But anyway, the thing was in 46, the McBain's band started up. And they became the predominant dance band in the area, in the whole of London, for quite a long time. I don't know if they still exist, but they did exist in the 60s, I know that. And the thing was, for a small outfit like our Saturday night deals, they would just send 4 people, an accordion, a fiddle, a drummer, and a pianist. They didn't send the whole group because they were involved in other functions. But that's how we started getting away from the 78s. We started getting live music for our socials. And so that was very helpful. But that's more or less what was going on in the 40s. Now, the thing was, we had very little to do with the London branch of the RSCDS. Even though some of the people we knew who came to Jack's socials and things like that were members of the London branch. And we found that, well, there was nothing different in the dancing that we were doing. And so that worked out very well. But I think what happened was, if Jen had shown way back when what there was dancing with the country dancing was like in the 30s, we agreed that Miss Milligan must have been very busy during the 30s and 40s, standardizing everything. So that when we came to dance in 45, 46, 47, in that time period, we were all doing the same thing. It was really very little different. And so from that point of view, you know, can you add to that, Jen, about what our thoughts were on that?
Well, sure. I mean, in the wartime, we know a lot of dancing went on sort of hiatus, although there was dancing being done at Bletchley Park, which maybe a lot of people didn't know about at the time. It was a secret at the time, but the code breakers at Bletchley Park had a very active Scottish country dancing group led by Hugh Foss, who we think of as the creator of J. Milne and other dances. But he was teaching, they actually had weekly Scottish country dancing classes there. He probably taught Hugh Thurston, who was also a cryptanalyst there at that time. Somewhere probably in the mid-30s, after Mrs. Stewart left or was not as active in the organization, there seems to have been a bit of a change in the technique, and the lift and the jeté started to kind of become a little more prominent in the dancing, and it might have had to do with the rise of Highland, or the beginning of the standardization of Highland dancing as well. Highland dancing existed for a long time before it became standardized, but then as it started to become standardized, people started to have more of the same, or looked for similar kinds of technique and shape. The shape of dancing became very important. But I have always wondered, though, Jeanette, I know even though the shape of it looked similar, there were definitely some differences in the way things were done in the London area. For instance,
like sure, I'm sure.
Well, so for instance, when you learned the poussette, how did you learn it? Did the man change foot? Did he not?
No, he went off on the right foot just as the woman did. They both were doing, absolutely. Yeah. That's what they did. And
I think that was a choice. It seems that maybe someone in the RCDS decided to keep to, although the person that we think created that, the way we do the formation now, who was John Duthie, always felt that both partners should start on the right foot, because then you would have the correct foot, or the proper foot, ready if you had to travel. Anyways.
Well, we definitely did that. And there was also a tendency in London, for example, if you take the Duke of Perth and you start with turn by the right and cast and whatnot, it was their major effort to turn as many times as possible within the 2 bars, you know. It was just unbelievable. And I came across that again after I went back for a visit back in the 70s, 80s. I joined the Berkhamsted group one night, and one fellow came and asked me to do the Duke of Perth, and I said, "You're going to do it London fashion?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, that's all I need to know." And so we learned like mad.
Did you take hands, or was it elbow?
Elbow.
Yeah, elbow. Yeah. Okay.
And so I mean, and that was very much a London thing, and it's like Edinburgh. Remember, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh is a dance that was written in the 40s, but it was danced such that your set and turn corners was done with skip change and 2 hands.
Right. And
pretty much an Edinburgh thing.
Yes, and honestly, right, that was honestly the first, the previous
That was the first dance where you ever saw it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
you know,
there is,
that was
because
more,
that was because I've seen some of the subsequent dances from the Edinburgh branch. I've got a few of the books, and they specifically say set and turn corners using skip change. So
Yes.
they're still doing it. But anyway.
Yes, even in the footage of the very traditional, or what we'd seen of the 30s anyways, it was done that way. I think someone decided they were going to add more pot of bosque.
Yep. Someone did.
By doing that. But it was not customary. Anyways.
That's for sure. But
so, oh, well, you go ahead and then I'll ask my question.
Okay. All right. Well, the thing was, back to that Sunday afternoon class, which Jack had decided he wanted children and, young adults and everything in it. I sometimes went up to it. I didn't go on a regular basis, but I sometimes went up, assuming I'd done my homework. I was allowed to go and join in. But I also helped out with the youngest class. I used to sort of stand in front and demonstrate and things for these kiddie-winkies. Well, would you believe I subsequently met one of these individuals in Canada in '73. So it's a small world. You never know who you're going to bump into and where. He was there competing. Right. And so it was sort of interesting. His family had emigrated to California, actually. Barbara and Robert know well who it is. He died recently, a couple of years ago.
Right. Maybe. Well, and Margaret knew him as well, so maybe you could say who it was.
It was Jim Lomath. He came to Pinewoods one year. He was not a Pinewoods person, period. But anyway, that's beside the point. But back to the 40s. In addition to the regular weekly hops, as you might call them, we had quite a few formal dances. Some of them were monthly, and then of course there were the annual balls. And so the Harrow Caledonian had organized a, oops, I've forgotten a few things here. But anyway, I wanted to show you a little bit more of Jack and his dancing. There are two pictures here, one after the other, of Jack and a couple of his team members dancing with Dad in the background, piping. Well, the girl, the dancer with Jack is Kathleen Raffin. You'll see her again later. And the man behind was his wife, was her wife. Oh, listen to me. Her husband, Raffin. They were very popular members of Jack's dance team. And that's Dad there in the background. Let's have a look at the second one of this type. Alex, next one. Yes. This was taken on the same day, but they were used in different publications. This was the News Review. That was in 1949. It was to advertise an article that was talking about this the Edinburgh Festival. So here they are posing for the sword dance.
Right.
And the little tot on the right, if I remember correctly, was Jack's daughter. So she wasn't dancing, obviously, but there you are. So those two worked out. Those were two things of them actually sort of in action, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But anyway,
Jeanetta, your father, you said, had past credentials to teach dancing.
Yep.
Did he continue to do that at this time?
I would say he didn't do any real much in the way of country dancing. He did some, but that was later in the 50s. And he couldn't do Highland for the simple reason he was minus 3 toes on his left foot, the large toe and 2 next to it, for an industrial accident in the 20s. So he never could really do Highland after that. But he could stand and illustrate, but he couldn't really put any weight on that foot. Country dancing he could do fine. But what happened was, after I started doing Highland, after I wore out my first pair of gillies, I cut down the left one and re-sewed it so it would fit his left foot, because of course it was a lot shorter. So then he would utilize that if he was sort of illustrating stuff. He would use gillies to illustrate using the shortened version on his left foot. So sounds crazy, but there you are.
And
he also
he seems to have been much in demand as a competition piper.
Oh, he
you know,
was.
probably because he had experience.
He had experience, exactly. Well, he had experience doing that when he was in the army. I mean, he spent 4 years in 8 years in the Black Watch, 4 years in France in World War I, and 4 years in India to follow. And he was involved actually in teaching dancing to the rest of the pipers because he knew how to do it. He had 2 older sisters who were really involved in going off to the jigging on Saturday nights. So he knew a lot from them, as you can imagine. So he was able to do a lot with the dancing, even as a piper. And I still have one of his dancing medals that he won when he was in the army. I wear it occasionally.
Wow.
And I also have his first medal that he ever won for piper at age 13. I have that. That was in 1913. I wear that one as well.
And so, you told me he won a Cowell medal.
He won a Cowell medal. I have that, but that's not on a chain. He'd been around a lot, as you can imagine. So as we children were growing up, we were exposed to a lot of this material. You know, we just couldn't avoid it, really. Now, Mother was never a dancer, but she was a pianist, so she could play. And so later
classes too.
Helped considerably, yes. So anyway, back to our balls, the formal balls that we had. The Scottish, Harrow Caledonia Society had their annual ball, which involved everybody all around the area, at the Wembley Town Hall. It was a fairly good sized hall. We had anywhere between 200 and 300, mostly at the top end of the numbers, every year. And so Dad, being the piper for the Harrow Caledonian, managed to pull together enough pipers to do a show sort of thing during intermission, but also there were 3 others who were very good at playing for dancing as well. And so he used those 4 for playing for dancers when it was called for. And again, it was McBain's band on stage. You know, it was just one of those things, they appeared everywhere. And so if we go up to the next picture, we will see Dad and his piping friends parading at Wembley Town Hall. That's Dad there on the left in the front, acting as the man in charge. I was well familiar with the one behind him, Walter Campbell. He came from Stornoway. And then the fellow on his on Dad's left was Arthur Lucas. And beyond that, behind these pictures of people on the screen here, there's Bill Gillespie, who Dad had known in Glasgow and also had been a Black Watch member, but just regular army. And so those 4 are the ones we used for dancing. All the rest were members of the Luton pipe band. And so Dad always brought in extras because of the volume of people and the size of the hall. So that's a picture of the Wembley Town Hall. You can't see much of it, but I put that one in because I thought it was of interest in a lot of respects. And it's a good one of the pipers he used as well for the dancing. And so we can move away from that, but I should also cover, what did we wear for those functions, those formal functions? Yeah. And it mostly concerns the feet. For example, I never wore a pair of gillies, pumps, or anything else to a formal dance. I always had regular dance shoes with Cuban-like heels, but they had the splits leather soles. They were ballroom dance shoes. And so, and obviously some of the men didn't wear their gillies either. They wore hard shoes. So it was the thing, it was only in classes or in the social dancing did we wear gillies. So now when you see some of the big wigs dancing, country dancing anywhere, the Queen, for example, she's in regular shoes.
Yes, yeah. You know, Bill Clement would remarked about the change of that as well.
Yes.
You know, that people could dance very well in these shoes, but we're choosing not to. But he felt we were losing a bit of that tradition of being dressed up for these.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we were dressed up to the nines, obviously, to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I know my mother made my first evening gown when I was about 15. And so that lasted me until I went to college, when I decided I would make a new one for myself. So I did. But anyway, so I think that the dress we wore and the footwear is sort of interesting, because we don't do any of that now. Definitely not. Everybody goes in whatever's comfortable. And so I like the dressing up situation, I must admit. I do like putting on formal clothes for a formal event. But I must admit, over recent years, I've worn my gillies too. It's just the way things are right now. So anyway, so this was, as I say, it was one of those things. And we brought ourselves during the 40s. I did an awful lot of things other than dancing, other dancing we've talked about. It was, let's see, we often talk about what was available for music and for books. I mean, book 20 came out in 59. Everything else came out, 13 came out in 45. Right. Because it's published. We first of all called the St. Valerie Reel, and ultimately was printed as the Reel of the 51st. But we always called it the St. Valerie Reel when it came out, because that's where the regiment had been captured, was at St. Valerie in France in 1940. But anyway, and
I
so
always think, I have a question, Jeanetta. I always think of that as like the beginning of people thinking of making up dances, but is that actually true? Were you aware of other people making up dances before that time?
In my mind, I was unaware of that. I'm sure there were, but I was unaware of it. And there were no publications available at that point in the 40s, particularly, that would attest to that. Because what happened was the Caledonian Society ran a Friday night social class, which Jack McConaughey ran. Of course, his name crops up all over the place in our area. And there, what we did was, his wife was a pianist, so she played piano a lot. Dad was always there with his pipes to do things that could use pipe music. And if Jean was available, my mother went and played for that class. So we had live music pretty well for that Friday night class, regardless of what. We didn't need to use records, which was just as well, because the 78s were very limited in how many rounds they did on a side. I mean, the 12 inches ones were made usually by the Scottish country dance players, and their music was very orchestral. And I didn't really like it. It was just too much so. But the thing is, you could get full rounds of dances, not the whole 8 bars or anything, 8. You might be able to get 4 complete rounds on a 12 inch. But if you were working with a 10 inch 78, you only got, say, 2.5 rounds. So you're stuck in the middle of a half a dance, you know. So you put it on at the beginning and you were dancing right off the music, totally. I mean, it was just unbelievable, but we did anyway. We just did it.
I put something in the chat about that, because when I started dancing, we still used some 78s, and they only lasted 3 minutes, which isn't 8 rounds even of a jig or reel.
You're right. Yep, that's what happened when I first came here. But anyway, but that was the things we were dealing with in the 40s and on most of the 50s. So from that point of view, the music was sort of interesting. And so there we are. But by and large, the thing was, I sort of did my little outline here, and I took the 40s first, knowing that during that time period, I had done a lot of interesting little details myself. In addition to Highland and country, I was also doing old time dancing. Or sequence dancing, as it became called ultimately. And then, I don't know what it's called today, but it's not even that, it's something else.
No, we sort of associate it as Ceilidh dancing somewhat now today.
Oh, some of those dances Not all,
Some.
but some have been
Oh,
taken into the Cayley
yes.
bracket. And it's anything
Yeah.
but what I learned, as you can imagine. Anything but.
I'm sure. Okay.
And so, and from that point of view, I also took all my medal tests for Highland and for old time dancing, bronze, silver, gold. And then I ultimately in 1950 got my associates in Highland with the United Kingdom Alliance of Teachers, Professional Teachers of Dancing, which allowed me to teach as a professional, which was rather interesting. And so, but the other times I had danced with the British Association of Teachers of Dancing. Well, Dad had taken his fellowships, which was the step above the associate, for both country dancing and Highland, not Highland, and old time dancing with both the BATD and the UKA group. And so, and that all happened before I went to college. And I had some very interesting little things I did during those 5 years or 4 years after, 46 through 49. One of the big things I went to was there was an international folk dance festival at the Royal Albert Hall, which brought in a lot of the dance groups from Europe. This was after the war. And they all brought in, and I think at that point, a lot of us were now exposed to a different group of bagpipes compared with what the Highland bagpipes were, because Europeans have got bagpipes of all different types of shapes and sizes. And so they were playing for their own dance demonstrations and whatnot. And that I thought was an extremely interesting evening to watch all this. Of course, Jack's team was doing their Highland thing and Dad was playing for that. So obviously all of the family went. And so that was one of the first things we did. And then somewhere, does somebody have a question? No? Okay.
Well, I did notice a question from, the question was about what did it mean to you to teach as a professional, or what was that qualification? And then I have another question as well, but.
It allowed me to earn money if I wanted to.
Great. So, and I've heard you mention a lot of, yes, a lot of performing situations.
Yes, I'm going to come up to that. Yep.
Okay.
One of the ones which I think was interesting in a way was the movie Bonnie Prince Charlie came out, I think it was around 1948 or thereabouts, with David Niven. It was a rotten movie. But the thing was, it opened at the Granada Theatre or Cinema in Harrow. And Jack had been hired to do dancing on stage before the movie. It so happened that that particular cinema had one of those theatre organs, and they often had shows before the main feature, and like a lot of cinemas in London did. So the thing was, I had got home from school, and Dad had come home from work and was all set, having had his tea and whatnot, to grab his pipes and go off to the theatre. But he said, "You're coming with me." He said, get dressed, blah, blah, blah. He said, so-and-so can't come. You're it. So I joined the team on stage before that movie. So I wasn't exactly dressed like all of them because they were all dolled up. And I was just, had a long sleeve blouse on and a kilted skirt. And I only had ankle socks. I didn't have knee socks in those days. And so I was sort of like a sore thumb. But we did the usual 4 dances. The women did chantreuse. The men did the sword dance. The 4 of us did a foursome reel and a Highland fling. So we did the 4 dances in a row. So that was sort of an on-stage event. I said, thank goodness I was used to being on stage because I'd done a lot of stage work as a kid when I was in South Wales. So, I mean, it didn't bother me too much. It was just a case of filling in at the last minute and hoping I could survive because I had not done anything quite like that. And then I think it was, I don't know whether it was 1949 or 1950. If it had been 1950, it would have been right after school finished, but I wasn't sure. It might have been 49. But Jack was invited again with his team to go to the Dorchester Hotel in London to give a demonstration of Highland dancing at this particular event, which was a dinner and ball to celebrate the reopening of Cecil Sharp House in London after the war. It had to be partially renovated or rebuilt or something, but it was reopening. And so their guest of honor was Princess Margaret. So they said, and she was being escorted, I think it was by the Earl of Ogilvy that time. I actually have a copy of the report in the following day's newspaper of this event. I kept the copy because I thought it was of interest to me anyway, because one of the wives who wasn't a dancer couldn't go. So I took the extra ticket and went with my father up to the Dorchester to watch the thing and join in the dinner and whatnot. And then, of course, they decided that after the Highland dancing was completed, they would do a Scottish country dance. And because it was Princess Margaret there, they decided to do the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, since it was her sister and brother-in-law. So up they get. And of course, our crowd, all our Jack's dancers, and myself and whatnot, we all knew the dance. So we decided we would get up and make a set as well. And we were right behind the royal set, you might call it. Well, I tell you, it was the funniest thing we ever saw in our lives. The newspaper said, Princess Margaret did a good job of coaching her partner through the dance. Well, we were in hysterics. She was directing traffic like you'd never believe. It was absolutely priceless. And I thought to myself, I'm familiar with doing that. And we were really having a good laugh at it. It really was funny. But the English dancers who were there, the bigwigs, they cottoned on no time fast. I mean, they were dancers. It was easy for them, figure-wise and everything else. But it was so funny because her crowd just were not exactly having the greatest time. And I thought this was really quite funny. And I thought it was a sort of an interesting event to go to. It really was. And then
Jeanetta, we had a question about Cecil Sharp House. Some
yes.
folks may not be familiar with Cecil Sharp House.
Well, it is the headquarters of the English Folk Dance and Song Society, of which the Boston CDS is part of it. It's part of the whole. It's just like the headquarters of the Scottish Dancers. It's in Edinburgh, RSCDS. It has the same function as Cecil Sharp House. That's where their headquarters are. And
yeah.
And so later in the 50s, which I haven't got to yet, I used to, with another friend, go up to their social night on a Wednesday to dance with the English. I didn't go to any of their classes or anything like that. I just went to dance at their social. So I used to go to Cecil House on Wednesday evenings. But that's what it is. It's really the headquarters. Okay. Then I said I got my first paying gig as a Highland dancer. It so happened that at that time, Dad had been playing at a wedding close to where Drury Lane Theatre is. And at the end, after the bride and groom had left, Dad was there packing up all his things and pipebox and whatnot. This individual, a rather large person, came and approached him. He was an American and part of the cast of Oklahoma. He was actually the actor who played Judd in the show. And he wanted to learn to play the pipes. So from Dad started to teach him. He used to take his chanter into work and then go off up to Drury Lane before he came home to do this. Well, at about that time is after I got my associates. Apparently, the fellow who was at Oklahoma, or there, an American who was concentrating on the dancers, keeping them in shape and rehearsing them and everything else all the time, was hired by a group at a theatre in Leicester Square. I think it was the Leicester Square Theatre, a cinema, because they had a chorus line. And so they were going to be doing something before a Scottish film. Which one? I have no idea what it was. But he wanted something that Scottish type dancing to see. So off I went met Dad after work. He had his chanter, so off we went up to Drury Lane Theatre. Boy, that place is fascinating. It's unbelievable the space they have behind the stage itself and underneath in the basement, full of different rooms for rehearsals, for everything. Well, anyway, we found this one room that we were supposed to go to, and here was this fellow, whatnot. So I did the fling and I did chartreuse for him, and then he picked up some of the things he wanted to work with. So we redid a few steps. It was mostly from chartreuse, and he picked up on a few of the steps, learned those, lickety-split. There was no doubt about it. And then he started modifying things for this chorus line. And so he said, you know, so I came away with a tensioning note. That was my first ever earnings as a professional Highland teacher.
I believe we have a couple of photos of you dancing, and I wonder if we might show those now.
Oh, yes. Well, I think we could, because I think we have got now to 1950. And so here we go. This was my team at college. It was the open day in spring 1952. They wanted something different. So I offered to have a team of dancers, but it was a women's college, as you can see. And so none of us had tartan. And so what we did was I put all the ones who were dancing women in their tennis whites, and they wore white plimsolls or tennis shoes. And the rest of us who were dancing as men put on our navy blue shorts and wore black shoes. I had my pumps, of course. That's me on the extreme left. Would you believe it? Who knows what dance we're doing? Anybody offer a suggestion? Oh my heavens. Glasgow Highlanders. And if you look at the bottom picture on the left, extreme left, there's a piper. I had to choose dances that were good for pipers. He was there at the college doing a special course with the principal, who was a history buff, and all these, there's a half a dozen or so men had come out of the service and were upgrading their memories of things before they got back into the teaching school again. So we did Glasgow Highlanders. That was the one my mother managed to take pictures of. It's her photographs. And so, of course, it's anything but perfect, because none of these people had done anything like this in their lives before. And we didn't start rehearsing until about January or February. And this thing was in May. But we got by. And I think the other dances that we might have done, I don't exactly remember which ones, but I think we did the Reel of the 51st, which was, of course, another pipe tune. We did Money Musk, which is also a pipe tune and can be danced that way, and Duke of Perth, which is another one that can be danced to the pipes. So those were essentially the dances that we demonstrated. So that was the first picture. But then in the 50s, after I left college, my life changed dramatically in that I was now teaching on a regular basis. And I started a class in school, because on Friday afternoons, I was teaching in a girls' school. In Friday afternoons, they were given choices for the last class of the day as to what they wanted to do. They could choose art. They could choose to go and do some, domestic science, as we called it. They could do some form of music, because there was a music teacher there. I don't know what else. So I offered to do a class, a country dance class. So the fact that I had, even though it was Highland, and I had didn't have any officialdom in country dancing, because I had a professional teacher's certificate for Highland, I was approved to do this class. So I did. So, but also that was on a Friday afternoon. But on Mondays, normally speaking, in the wintertime, we did I did a lot with our Old Students Association. You would have called alumni. We did old students, one of those things. And we did wintertime, we did badminton in the gym, and summertime, we did tennis. On Tuesdays, I had plenty of time to get some schoolwork done for marking books and goodness knows what else. Wednesdays, I occasionally did go up to English dancing. Thursdays, I was teaching our old Students Association dance there, because most of us had done dancing in school during our last few years there, the country dancing. And so that was something else that I had been involved in the 40s, was they started country dancing there. Once they found out, when I turned up, you couldn't join it until you were in the last couple of years in school anyway, equivalent to your grades 11 and 12. I joined in, took my gillies with me, and it was obvious, the fellow who was trying to teach this, had never done really anything before. He was only learning from the caretaker who'd been in the Gordon Highlanders. So, I mean, you were seeing all sorts of different things. He said, it's obvious you know what to do. So after that, I used to have to coach him every week before class during lunch hour, what he could do and what he couldn't do and how to do it. So I landed up being the demonstrator for that group. So ultimately, we did do from the school, we did some demonstrations, but a lot of it was into folk dance festivals and things through the schools more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Jeanetta, did you compete at Highland Games yourself,
no.
or was it more? No. Yeah. Cool.
No, I didn't want to compete. I felt I really didn't think that was for me. And my father anyway told me I was the wrong shape. I was too short, wasn't skinny enough. And on the boards. So he quite told me flatly, he didn't really think I wanted, and I didn't want to anyway. So that was but I never learned to play the pipes either, because he wasn't exactly fond of seeing women pipers, I'm afraid. He was old school.
Okay.
And so
we do have some photos of Jeanetta doing some Highland dancing. So I wonder if we might also
that's next. This happened exactly 1 year after the ones you just saw of me. Okay, here we go, the next three. There's me, ankle socks and short sleeves. Okay. And my woman dancing next to me is Kathleen, the girl you saw in those colored pictures way back earlier. And I'm sure you can figure out what we're dancing with the way the arms are. It was chartreuse. And there's Dad on the left playing for us. Mother always managed to get things from the rear end. I don't know why. She always managed to get in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, but I mean, I surprised myself. I could actually get on my toes in those days. So gets us to get onto number 2, the page next second picture. This was us, the 4 of us. This was Kathleen's husband, Will, on the left. And we borrowed the fellow on the right from the class at University College, which I used to go to on a Friday night, because I gave up going to Jack's Friday night classes. I went up to UC to join this group. And so here we are doing the fling. And and of course, that's Ian on the right with my father playing. That's my brother. And so he was already into playing at that point. So the final one of this set of 3, I think, is just hilarious. Why did my mother always manage to get us, from the rear end? She had a handy knack of doing that, I'm sure. I mean, it's really quite funny when you think about it. But anyway, so you've seen pictures of me, 52 and 53, doing country dancing and Highland dancing. So I did.
That's good.
I did do it.
So Jeanetta, we're starting to come kind of close to the end here. One of the things we haven't talked about, or you haven't gotten into too much yet, is the repertoire. That was something that was interesting to you.
Well, repertoire was usually limited by records available and books available. So we started getting more books coming out. But since before the war, none of us belonged to the RSCDS at that point. So we used to go up to Patterson's on Wigmore Street to get the publications there, because Patterson's was the publisher for the RSCDS in those days. They had an office and store on up in town. So I used to save up my pennies, and Mother used to help out because she needed the stuff for dancing, for the classes, if she was playing. And she had other material as well to add to that. So she had books of dance music that she'd collected over the years. And so in the 30s, she collected all that stuff. And so there she was doing that. So we were very limited by what was available at the time. Now, we might have been unaware of other things that might have been available, but that's what we were limited to. So my Tuesday, Friday afternoon class in school, in the first school I was teaching in, I used to borrow from my Thursday afternoon evening class a few of the records there, which I used to leave a note to say which ones I borrowed, so that next Thursday, having done it like my class on the previous Friday, I could return them. So I switched in and out from what we'd had in school. So that's how we managed. And of course, the repertoire was sort of limited. But the thing was, after the war, I did join the London branch, but I must admit, I never went to their classes. But I did go to some of their socials, and that was about it, because I had too many other things on my plate at that point. So in the second school I was teaching, we had our class for the youngsters on a Tuesday night, and I had gone to University College for their class. They alternated each night from a Scottish dance to an English, Scottish, English, and we alternated every Friday night. So I learned a lot of English stuff at that point as well. And I also joined them for a demonstration once. I was asked to fill in, of course. Here we go again. I filled in all sorts of places. And then I had gone with them to 2 inter-university events, folk dance festivals. One was to Manchester and the other was to Birmingham. So I went to those in the 50s. And so, so there we are. We come up to the end of 1950, and I was really at that point, in 59, I was planning to come here, which I did in January of 1960. So there we are.
So we had a question about what you were teaching in school.
In school was the things that were available based on availability of books and records. It was the usual old book 1, book 2, book 3 types of content with the children, because there are a lot of very easy dances in those set books, rather than some of the more complicated ones that came out. I mean, I would never intend to teach them really the 51st. That was a bit beyond them. So it was really picking up the easy material from the early books. That's what I did in schools. So if you look at those books, you can see which are easy and which are not so easy, and you can figure out which ones I probably did. I mean, there were some of those were, you know, book 1, Petronella. Everybody did Petronella. I mean, that was just one of those things. Fight About the Fireside, which is also book 1, was one of my favorite dances from that time period. I really liked that one. And so that one wasn't that difficult, really, but it brought in the Reel of 3 and all this jazz. So it was another thing I could introduce to the kids. So, so by and large, that was what I was teaching. And then on our Tuesday...
A couple more questions are coming to the chat, but I know there were a couple more things we had wanted to share. So I'm wondering if maybe we can do that, and then we'd open up to questions and answers, just, you know, so people can ask more specifically.
Right. Well, I think the things that you now will be seeing are actually a sample of programs that were sent to me by an ex-member of McBain's band. And I've got these on a file. So if anybody else ever in the future wants to see these in detail, they can email me and ask for the file, because I've still got it. And this was a group run by this Piping Society in Harrow. And they ran this for a few years. This was this covers 56, the end of 56 and 57. And this fellow that had these in Florida was a member of McBain's band during this time period. And he sent to me these particular programs via Tony Moretti. So that's how I got them. And so I probably went to the last one on this page. On the next page, if you go on, if you could go on to the next one, please, Alex.
There we go.
Oh, nothing's coming up on my screen.
Oh.
No, that's too far.
Okay, one back. There we go.
There you go. Here you see the 4 dances, the 4 particular ones that we started with. And then I probably went to the early ones. But after the November one, I never went. That was when my father was sick. He ultimately died in the February following in 57. But the thing was, if you notice on all of these, the previous page and this one, everyone ended with the waltz country dance. Mm-hmm. Also, in the first half, it was either the 8-some reel or the 4-some reel to end it. Mm-hmm. And that was consistent through their programs. Now we can go to the next one. Now this one was more of a ball, and I put it on. Obviously you can't see it because of the pictures of people there, but you notice there are a few ballroom dances on this program. There's a quick step, and we come down to the Pride of Erin waltz, the Volita, and so on, and there's some on the second half as well. And those were usually done in the formal dances, because there were a tremendous number of people who were ballroom dancers and not country dancers. So we had to provide for them. Mm-hmm. And so the band, again, McBain's Highland Band, had to indulge in learning other forms of dance as well in their playing. And the funny is, the MC, A.K. Rose, was actually a person who was in Jack's early social nights, because he came from Wembley, when we first started back in 46, 45, 95, 46. Remember seeing him, he always brought his family. So he was still going strong there in this particular year. Okay, and now we get to another one. I've got 3 of these type of balls. You see, here we go again. We had a Canadian barn dance in this one, another quick step. And over on the other side, we say St. Bernard's Waltz. And so on, and so a Pride of Erin again. So you see that we included, and the last one on this particular set is, here we go again. Look at this. This is Watford and one, but they also again have these other dances included. And so from that point of view, those are the formal dances. The informal ones didn't provide for that because there was only country dances that turned up. Because a lot of people on the formals, a lot of couples came, one of whom would be dancing and the other not. So that's how we did it. And so consequently, and it was sort of interesting to see all these other things, because a lot of these, obviously, dances I knew. And the quick step was one thing that Jen was interested in. And so she has unearthed a small video of a quick step that was done in 42, and it's short. And the thing was, it's exactly the way I learned it. And Judy can attest to that, because she saw me doing it at one of the balls in New York City, way back, with somebody. I've forgotten the fellow's name now, but he was a member, but also he was from Britain, and he was the piper, I think, there in New York City at the time. And so apparently, nobody else got on the floor. And it was Stan Hamilton playing. So you see, there's another band that got into playing other things. Okay, let's look at the video. Go.
There we go.
They're just as good and proper. Today, dancers get together for, say, a quick step. And quick on the beat is policeman dancing champion Charles Theobald. With his partner Doreen Bien, he won the recent professional championship. And here they are showing you how the quick step should be danced. The short frock and the uniform were worn at the actual contest. Serious business called for serious garb. And you can at least watch the ladies' steps with greater ease. Notice particularly the quarter turns. Watch the dance in slow tempo. These movements show the drag and the lock step. The progression of quick, quick and slow, slow steps that distinguish the dance. Now you can't go wrong. back to normal tempo and the championship quick step. Let's hope it's only a quick step back to the days when it was danced like this. Back early.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's the end of my dissertation at this point, and I'm sure some of you have questions and whatnot, but I'd like to thank the team who backed me up, Jenna, who's done a lot of research herself, and then Alex, who put the picture show together, and for Karen in the background, whose expertise in this good old computer business has paid off. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you have any more questions, and I can be here for a little longer.
There was one question, Jeanetta, that was a simple question of what subject were you teaching when you were at school?
Elementary mathematics and general science.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Does that sound
interesting? Howard had some interesting comments earlier on about the tempo of marches between the Americans and the Scots.
Oh yes.
Going back.
Oh, I don't know why, but they are very different, or at least they seem to be.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was going to say, I put that in the chat, and like Scottish bagpipe bands march at 88 beats per minute, but American military marching bands march at 120 beats per minute.
Well, that's why the difference that we saw. Yep. And quite honestly, it just amazed us because it was totally new to us. Mm-hmm. As you can imagine why it would be, but they did get a standing ovation, I must admit.
Yeah. For those of you who aren't so familiar with tempos, 120 beats per minute is considerably faster than we dance even jigs and reels. Jigs and reels are about 112.
Yep. The thing is, I noticed that I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago from Edinburgh, and they were talking about strathspeys and the change in speeds there. And it was rather interesting because I copied a little bit down about that because I thought was. And they indicated that Adam Rennie, who was one of the band leaders back in the 40s and whatnot, in 1950, he did a recording which had the strathspey going at 150 beats per minute.
Wow.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons we used to dance it a lot faster as we did now. Then there was another one that came up with Bill Clement. They used Money Musk as an example for this. And there was with Bill Clement playing on the pipes, he was going at 124. Mm-hmm. Then later, Alistair and Muriel were doing 122. Mm-hmm. And then there was another one, a new modern fellow, John Minton or Hinton, I think, who was playing at 131. So there has been a dramatic change in the speed of the strathspey, and that I can attest to as well. Because when I went to one of the TAC things with Milligan teaching, I think he had us moving at a walking pace, strathspey, until it was absolutely perfect. And Stan was playing, and he was going cuckoo about it because he was fed up for 45 minutes playing at that speed. But Miss Milligan somehow managed to slow things down for us. But sometimes I find, especially with older folk, I speak to some of the older folk around, like me, that if you play it too slowly, you lose balance easily.
Right.
You do need to speed up a little bit for older folk because of the balance situation. Does that sound reasonable to you teachers out there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Jeanetta, there was a question, what made you move to the USA?
Oh, My father was one of 10 children. He was number 4. And in the 20s, he and his oldest brother, who was 10 years older than him, the only 2 in the family who had jobs. They were in Glasgow, all of them. So in 1927, my grandfather and the 4 oldest, his dad's older sister and 2 younger sisters came over. And the following year in 28, my grandmother and the younger came over. The youngest had only been born in 1914, and he was the one I stayed with when I first came here in 1960. I was coming for 2 years to meet my family. Big joke, I've been here 60. So I never went back for good. And so, and it has been the dancing that's really kept me here. And so in some respects, it has really proved to be a lifesaver. And so I'm very glad that I came with some knowledge of something that I already knew and could join in, and everybody was doing the same thing. And so from that point of view, it was extremely good, I thought anyway. And it was only here, that's why I came in the first place, was to meet the family. And there's still one cousin I've not yet met at all. And so it's just one of those things. I've lost touch with a lot of the family now. I think everybody's gone their own way, and of course, all my father's generation are now since gone. So there's nobody left but a few of us, that's for sure. But there we are. So that's why I came. So that explains that, I think, to the person who was asking. Oh, as Alex asked the question, why did I come? Well, I'm still here. But anyway, I certainly have enjoyed my dancing here, but that's another story from 1960 to 2020, that's for sure. That's another story. But I'm not intending to go into that at this time, as you can imagine.
Another day. We'll get you back.
But, as I say, as you can tell, I can talk too much sometimes.
Although it'd be interesting to learn more of after 1960, because I think with that we'd hear a lot of the history of our branch. So that would help us to get to know a little bit more about where we've been, where we have been.
Well, there were actually very few people that were in the branch when I came are alive today.
Oh, yeah.
Well, could we do that maybe tomorrow night?
I don't think so, Freddie. But it's sort of interesting, you know, that when I arrived, there was a group of people, and of course I've still got friends with amongst them, and so that works out very well. Yeah. And so it was just one of those things. And so anyway, before you all completely log off, I've got something here that which I think is a little interesting. It's a poem, and Judy read one of this individual's poems in the Kaylee. Listen to this and see how you think it fits. We're a group of Scottish dancers, and our years are showing through. Our aging feet don't always do the things we want them to. We sometimes don't remember, and we often take shortcuts. And any youngster watching us would no doubt think we're nuts. Our muscles may be bandaged up, our rheumatism bad, but we'll think of when we're really old, of all the fun we've had, the crippling agony of cramp, the drives home through the sleet, assorted ligaments we've pulled, the aching of the feet. Ah, happy days of jolly fun. And when the season ends, the main thing we are left with is a lovely lot of friends. I think that's true, don't you?
Yes. Thank you.
Very true. Yes.
You know, I think that's an appropriate end to the conversation. And I'm glad to see all you people I haven't seen for a long time. It's rather nice.